So, here we go. You guys want to stand up so that the camera can see you up there? So you can all be 2 stars. Yeah, it started out as they had one person here in the room,
And then the whole group showed
They
up.
all
It was a big
decided,
meeting
we're
on
gonna
that.
work with it. I think that's creative planning right there. Strategy.
So we believe that advertising agencies will be able to survive. Advertising agencies will be able to survive in the postmodern, post-industrial, and digital world by needing to adapt to the rapid changes digitally. The pricing of advertising will fluctuate, and agencies' innovation as they reposition themselves against modern competitors, which there are more of than other traditional advertising agencies.
Okay, so with regard to that, what do you all think about the idea that if you get too big, and a lot of the big advertising agencies, we talked about the fact that they're concentrated primarily in New York. They focus on big accounts, and they can become cumbersome. I mean, you have a tendency to, as you become larger and more bureaucratic, to become bought into. For example, they may promote products and services that they know about because they have an infrastructure built in. What do you think about that with regard to the idea that people are coming up and just developing their own, companies are able to just go out and grab sort of content ad hoc? And those smaller companies can be more responsive to the changing needs. I mean, if we analogize, for example, to the wheel of retailing, what happens in the wheel of retailing? Anybody remember this?
What is it, made,
Marketing.
bought, used, thrown away?
Now, the wheel of retailing talks about sort of the progression of retailers as they enter the market. So if we think about an analogy to, for example, Walmart, how did Sam Walton start out in retail? Anybody know?
He still lived like one little store.
He had one, he actually didn't own, it wasn't called Walmart at the time. It was a Ben Franklin 5 and dime. And he did some real innovative things, but it was basically, you start out as sort of a cheap, low-cost provider to enter the market. One of the things that he did is he made flip-flops popular. He found these at a trade show, and nobody thought that anybody would wear this little, like, thin piece of rubber with a thing between 2 toes. And he recognized that, like, in Arkansas and in the heat and in the South, it may be popular to have something like that. So he just bought a big bin of them and put them out there and sold them for just almost nothing, but enough to make a profit, and they became really, really profitable. He then takes that knowledge when his store gets closed, and he creates a store called Walton's, and they get a little bit more sophisticated, and then he opens more stores. And now what's happened to Walmart? Well, they started out as this low-cost provider, but now what are they doing? They still have this everyday low cost or everyday low price slogan, but what are they offering? What kinds of services is Walmart now offering?
It's convenient, you can get everything you need in one place.
You get everything you need. So it started out as just sort of textiles and home goods. So now you've got grocery store, you've got clothing, you've got jewelry. Walmart is, by the way, the largest retailer of diamonds in the world. And
I didn't know they had diamonds in it. I thought it was all fake.
no, they're the largest single retailer of diamonds in the world.
I thought they were
They
fake.
have pharmacy. What else have they started adding to compete with things like Amazon? What are they doing?
They have vet clinics too.
Oh, yeah. Well, now they have 2 days free shipping with no subscription.
They now have the same. They're doing purchasing and subscription buying.
Yeah,
What
they-
else can you do?
They had to do a little pickup things.
Yeah.
That's right. Now they've got a personal. This is a deal. They've got a personal shopper. So you start out with this sort of very flexible model. He had the small store, 5 and dime. It's now become a behemoth, and they offer more services. So even though Walmart, nobody would suggest that Walmart is now like Neiman Marcus, where you have concierge services and stuff like that. But it's getting pretty close. You can order online. You can go to the store and you can have it, picked up or pulled from the shelves for you. You can pick it up at one of their little boxes. And so that's really a lot of service that they are now offering in terms of from where they progress. Well, if we applied sort of the same analogy, the advertising agencies. When advertising first became really big, and the golden age of advertising, which was with television and radio, you had these big companies that formed, and now there's still a lot of them are committed to advertising and radio, and you see these smaller players entering into the market in terms of their ability to serve the needs of businesses and develop their own sort of advertising platforms. I mean, Facebook is an enormously powerful social media, and even small mid-sized businesses can do this on their own. They don't necessarily need a huge, big company, right? And those big companies may be committed to, this is the way we've done it. You sell product through television advertising.
Well, that was something we kind of talked about, was like for them to be able to survive, they have to have that agility. And I think with those bigger ones, it's going to be tough for them to survive unless they're more innovative. But the smaller ones, I think, will have less trouble staying around because they can specialize in more areas or help. A lot of places, we read in the book that people are doing stuff in-house more. But with that being said, not everything can be done in-house, so they can go to more of a specialized area for help. But the big ones might need to start looking at, what are they going to do to compete with the small guy? Because at this point, it seems like the small ones are in a better position.
Yeah, they're I think more able to adapt to, if you have a huge firm that is focused on production of television, for example, commercials, and you're committed to that, it's harder to get people to start being more flexible and recognize that what you need to do, and thinking about the commission structure, is focus on things that are online content and developing that same kind of stuff for an online world. You see this again with regard to things like, if we make an analogy to retail, what's happening with a lot of people in Walmart? Well, there are other stores that are coming in that are taking market share away from Walmart because people, and this is happening at the malls as well, by the way, people are tired of going into a huge, massive store. If I want groceries, I don't want to be bombarded with everything else. So what are some of the things that are actually coming into for example, the grocery market, and they're able to take away some of Walmart's competitive advantage? Well, like stores like, how many of you shop at Aldi?
It's
What's
great.
the great thing about Aldi?
Their produce and meat is extremely cheap and fresh.
Yeah,
And you don't have to wade through
yeah,
miles of other stuff. If what you're looking for is groceries.
yeah, and a lot of their product, like it's not necessarily like the top of the line product. It's a lot of it's like European brands. So it's the same quality stuff, but just much cheaper price. And the thing is, like they're also like great for the environment. You bring your own bags. You can't use plastic bags. So they have a ton of positive things. I don't know. I go there a lot.
I also like the linear format where they are really efficient, and I appreciate that is they don't have to have someone at the end of the night go get all their shopping carts. You put a quarter in, and it's like a deposit. You get your quarter back, but you want your quarter back. You're not just going to leave it, so you go put the shopping cart back to get your quarter. If you don't have bags, you can use their boxes that they use from the shelves. So they don't even stock the shelves all pretty like Walmart. They put the box out there, and then once that box is done, they put it in a bigger box.
And you can take it from the
You
bin.
can take it from there. Also, they only have 2 people working, which sometimes is annoying, but they're extremely quick and they just get you out of there. And you don't see a lot of people going back and forth between the aisles. Did you have a row? You make your list, and you make
Yeah,
your list.
there's not like 30 gazillion aisles like with Walmart. It's just one little big.
Right, and that may be, and so if we think about, there may be specialists, what we saw in the 1970s and 80s and 90s, like this convergence, and this has happened in the banking industry as well, where you saw this massive amounts of bank consolidation, and now you're seeing some, Ally Bank, and all online banking, not having actual physical locations, because for most of you, do you really need a physical location?
Well, I can deposit my check through a mobile app.
Right, exactly. I mean, you don't have to, and how many of you actually get live checks anymore?
Yeah, it's direct deposit.
So if you have there's this idea that smaller agencies that specialize in sort of niche types of development may be more capable of serving customers' needs, as we recognize that, particularly in the United States, where small and mid-sized businesses are comprising a lot of our economy, and they can't afford necessarily, first of all, they can't go to New York, and they can't afford a big advertising agency to do that. Now, obviously, the big advertising agencies are still gonna play a role for, companies like Ford and GM and Pfizer and all of those. But where are they, if we think about, again, an analogy towards sort of the product life cycle, where are they in the product life cycle, these big firms? I don't know.
Another thing we talked about, like, because the traditional ways can still be successful today, just not as much as it used to be, but you can still find some success. Sticking with that, and then maybe having half the company do the old traditional ways and half the company go the new direction. So that way you're getting both, but you're not stuck in those old ways. So you're able to adapt and learn with the new social media and all that digital stuff.
Well, and one thing that you kind of said too is just influencers are the biggest key as well too. That companies used to spend a lot of money on their market research trying to figure out the perfect target market where they could go to somebody on YouTube like Logan Paul, see his following, be like, that's perfect for Coke. We're going to give him $500,000 to say, hey, Coke's great for 5 episodes, instead of spending some big marketing firm millions of dollars to do that. And I think that's why we're saying that they need to adapt in that way. The best way for someone to do that as a smaller medium marketing firm is to contract Logan Paul or partner up with somebody like a social influencer, kind of do a contract work for them too, and then everyone's happy as well. Because influencers are extremely cheap right now. I mean, you can.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think that's why like blogging and stuff on YouTube has become so popular.
Yeah.
And like the people, even if they don't have, I mean, they obviously have a large following and maybe like a few 100,000 subscribers, but then you get like these brands recognize that you're getting a lot of attention, and so they're able to just say, hey, why don't you, or even
They
just
just
maybe
send
not,
They just
yeah.
send you their product.
Yeah, maybe not even, like, I've seen Jay Alvarez, which he's like, just travels around and posts a lot of cool pictures on Instagram. And he'll just like have a video randomly of like him playing a video game on the beach, but in a way that's the brand reaching out. So,
And these
Oh,
social
Jay-
influencers.
Jay Alvarez
I've
playing this
I've
video
also
game.
seen-
I could,
I've also seen sometimes they'll send someone like a social influencer their product, and then they give them a code, and based on how many people use that actual code,
Yeah.
that's how much money they'll pay them
Yeah.
for
That happens a
advertising.
lot with makeup artists, like
Yeah.
they give them like certain makeup brands and like mini brushes. Like one of them is Morphe brushes, and they're like, if you buy this brush and use my code, you can get like a 15% off.
The other thing.
that's a pretty smart way to do it, actually.
Yeah,
Well, and
that's
I didn't
great.
only pay by views, so they can give them $1,000 and they're gonna think they're rich
Oh,
for a week.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because they got $1,000 just to talk about more brushes or whatever you said.
Well, and that's one of the things with digital media, we can track that, we can track those metrics.
Yeah, and I can do it on my laptop. I mean, I'm starting my own website and company, and what I can do on my laptop is what advertisers were able to do 5-10 years ago.
Yeah.
I can do Google Analytics, Facebook. I can see who clicked my email blast, why they didn't go into it, who just deleted it. I mean, it's crazy.
Like on your website or your?
Everything. Yeah, I can see and I can follow the cursor. So if their cursor hovered over a button that I haven't implemented as a filter yet, I can see, they clicked on that filter and it's not working. I need to fix that. Or if they hovered over the home button.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Well, and there's a lot of other websites that are already out there, like Hootsuite, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like after you send out a social media post, you can see how many.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I see.
Yeah. And it's just like it's stuff like that. So like Joe Smith can do his own advertising for a company.
Yeah.
That's all I did. I did that all summer for an internship.
Yeah.
It was like.
But I also think
I'm one person and I advertise just as much as they would have to pay somebody to do it.
it gives
Yeah.
people a sense of false understanding of social media as well too, or that's where these big companies can come in and say, hey, we see that you've already got it established, here's a cut rate that we can help you finish your social media as well too, because it is complicated and it's more than just giving Facebook $100 and trying to figure out where to go. You have to create the image and
Yeah.
go through that. So I think that's where they need to adapt as well.
I think the only problem that the smaller ad agencies that we talked about in the beginning, like the only issue that they would really have is like the big money players, they have big money, they have more resources.
Yeah.
So I think that would be one of the only things that would hold back those small companies, those niche players, is even though they're more agile because they have less to change, changing might be still a little bit difficult for them as other places and things innovate.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the like ability to have funds to do anything can always is obviously going to be more beneficial if you didn't have funds. 'Cause-
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree with what you're saying.
All right, good. Let's go to the other group. The other large group. It's not a combined group.
Okay, so we have that advertising agencies can survive in a postmodern, post-industrial digital world, if they're willing to adapt and be flexible. Just how we talked at the beginning of the class, how the train example, so like, was it the line that goes through Edmond, it's like Santa Fe, something or other. So they're still relevant, but like compared to how they could have been at the, like, the beginning of the 20th century, the 21st, or yeah, 20th, 19th and 20th centuries, like they were booming, and railroad was like the new technology. If they would have centered themselves in the transportation industry and not just the train or railroad industry, they could be a lot more relevant and successful today. So advertising agencies, if they don't just contain themselves to one media, like, oh, I'm just a radio, we specialize in radio advertising, or just specialize in billboard or newspaper. If they want to survive and remain relevant, they're gonna have to start kind of updating their strategy and their practices, like to be more efficient, like using clickstream data or geofencing, because that's how they recognize their consumers, and then they can advertise by using like social media, Google ads, Facebook ads, and so.
Okay, so that's one of the things that's really interesting that you bring up is this idea of, because we give so much of our information away, and if you agree with certain apps, they can tell, for example, when you're near a Starbucks. And so they can really micro-target you by knowing what it is that you like and that you are close to them, and getting those, basically bots to send out suggestions. Why do you think that it is that when you enter into your geolocation service on Google, for example, do you think Google is just giving you Google Maps because they're a philanthropist?
No, I mean, that's your payment is your data. Facebook, it's not free. Twitter, it's not
Right,
free.
they're watching, and they know every single time you say, find the nearest, how many of you do this with your phone? Find the nearest Starbucks. And now, that's very easy to aggregate that data and come up with ways of using it to very specifically micro-target you. So are the tech companies going to be the big competitors?
I think, well, like you said, like the individual can now compete with an advertising agency. Like you can use these apps that you're competing with. So an advertising agency can compete with an individual who's using technology, like these services. But I think the individual, like a common business owner who has had no business degree or no marketing degree, doesn't know how to do their strategy effectively, they don't know how to do their research effectively. Like, yeah, they can get that data for free. Like, I can see it, but I don't know what that means. Like, I don't know how to effectively use that and put myself in an advantage. So I think an advertising agency still has that advantage because they've studied it, they're professionals. So if they use the data they're getting from these geofencing and like clickstream data or whatever, they see that, they know exactly how to market to you, they know exactly what population they're selling to, like whatever Starbucks, the majority of like who their consumers are. So they know all of that, and they know exactly how to sell you, and they think they do a good job. Not to say that it's not going to get harder with individuals that are knowledgeable on the fact. Relevant. It's just going to get harder.
So do you think, though, with your generation, in your ability to understand how to use this stuff because you grew up with it, that changes it? So you're right. I think in that businesses that are run by people who are maybe not as tech savvy as your generation are still going to need to rely on experts to analyze that data. But as you all have entered in and you understand, and you can do this, you set up websites, a lot of you, for yourself and for your own businesses and things like that. I find a lot of students that have actually done this, and they have a pretty good understanding. Maybe it's not a statistician level of understanding, but it's good enough.
YouTube, you can YouTube it.
Absolutely, it's amazing
I
what
don't
you
think
can.
it's brand strategy for brand marketing.
It's amazing what you can find on YouTube. In fact, I have several videos. One of the things that I've done on my YouTube channel is I've started going through and showing how you can do certain things. And I learned how to do these things myself on YouTube. It's just that I think I maybe create a better video. So for example, maybe it's not a better video. Maybe I'm just being very egotistical. But for example, my mother's windows on her car broke. And if you've ever looked at how they're put together, it would make you enormously mad. I just Googled how to replace the regulator and motor on a Honda Element. I found a video of it, and then I made my own video of how to replace it.
With better camera quality, of course.
So, well, I don't know if my camera was better. I just didn't take as long explaining it because I was more efficient in the explanation than the guy that I
Somebody's
got.
always like filming and trying to do it at the same time.
Right.
And they're like,
Yeah.
they're not even filming they're like filming the
Autofocus is like.
Yeah.
You know, it used to be that you had to take your car, again, another one that I did, if your air conditioner wasn't blowing really cold, you had to go and they had special equipment to gauge to figure out, well, you can now buy these cans that have got the pressure gauge on it, and it's really easy to pop open the hood, hook it up to the low pressure valve and charge your own air conditioning. And, so, all right, that's good job on those. Do y'all have anything else that you wanted to add?
No, I'm here.
All right. So here's what we're gonna do, I think, and I will send out an email on where we're headed. We're gonna talk about consumer behavior today. Like the power to come on, the ceiling projector.
Yeah, what I do is I can do it outside.
We're gonna talk about CB today, and then on Tuesday, we're gonna talk about communication. So I'm going to talk about the communication process, source, messaging, and channel factors. And then we'll have the first exam on Thursday. Next week it's listed for the 24th, which is actually Tuesday, if I got the dates correct on that. So we won't get through all of chapter 7, we'll get through chapter 6. And then I will combine, because chapter 7 goes well with, budgeting goes well with planning and development. So that makes a nice fit. So that'll actually be on the second exam. So I will send out an email through D2L telling you how I'm going to sort of modify the schedule a little bit. Why is this not- Your bus coming up in a minute ago.
And the big thing for WordPress is they have.
Sorry if I
Where you get a website, it's like you were.
I was thinking about how crazy
It was a Squarespace. Like,
It's like literally
like,
bloggers and stuff, how they just like subconscious let everybody search around that.
it's how
High goal,
you want to do
like that, watching like,
that you have to
like major
make sure
podcasts,
you
just like
use
use
like
like
how
how
just have like
Yeah.
stuff like that there, yeah.
Yeah.
So they can, like, hire.
All right, so for some reason,
I'm thinking like.
the, this one is not working. I'm not sure why. It's not coming up, so you'll have to turn around and look at it. So-
Now we're eye to eye with the camera.
Now you're eye to eye with the camera, that's right. So classical consumer behavior is predicated on what's called the rational actor model. And what this says is that people pursue goals. Why is it, if you think about yourselves as consumers for educational services, why is it that you all are here and listening to me talk about CB when you would rather be out sitting by the lake, it's a nice day, It's gonna start raining. What's gonna happen this weekend? Yeah, it seems like the fair is always the time where it starts out, the first few days of the fair are always like 100 degrees, and then by the end of the fair, it's amazing how the weather's, it's been like downpour in Oklahoma. And so you could be down at the fair today while it's nice, enjoying a poncho dog instead of sitting here. So why is it that you're sitting here instead of down at the fair enjoying your poncho dog and your ice cold Budweiser beer or whatever it is you will drink these days? Yeah, you want a return on your investment. You want to get a better job. And you've been told somewhere along the way, probably by somebody that influenced you, that if you want to get a better job, you need to go to college. So what did you do when you decided you wanted to go to college and get a degree? Well,
Research the Harvard of the Hills.
you researched the Harvard of the Hills. You thought about, well, probably what do I want to do? What kind of degree program do I want? How many of you thought that you would be marketers when you started out?
That's a history education major.
You were a history education. I was a political scientist, so I didn't start out.
That's not fitting for
As
you.
I
This is
A
much more
marketer.
fitting.
Why did you all choose marketing?
I started out in management, and then I realized that that was super broad. And I really liked the marketing class that I took, and I thought it was interesting. And I looked into it more, and I saw in marketing and sales that there was more money. So
Okay, so that's a good thing. You did sort of you come out with this idea that you're going to go to college, you're going to get a degree in management, and then you get more information as you go along. Once you actually start in your field of study, you realize, oh, well, for example, I actually didn't start out as a political scientist. I got a political science degree. I started out as a classical letters major, and I realized very rapidly that,
classical letters.
yeah, so it's philosophy, language, history. It's sort of a very Renaissance degree where you have to be proficient in a modern language and an ancient language. So I was going to do Hebrew as my ancient language, and then Spanish as my modern language. And you have to take a lot of philosophy courses, a lot of history. It's a very well-rounded, sort of broad major. What we might think of as being the typical Renaissance man. And I realized that there was nothing you could do with any of those. You didn't have enough of anything to do anything with it. And so I became a political science major because I could go to law school, and I figured that's how I was going to make a living. And political science was sort of a natural segue into law school. Most colleges at that time offered pre-law in their political science department. We actually offer it in the College of Business here as part of the legal studies program in the College of Business. So, that's how I sort of ended up. But so I reevaluated things. So I knew I was going to go to college. I pursued this goal. Now, with regard to goal pursuit, I think it's important that we recognize that in consumer behavior, and when we think about integrated marketing communication, we can influence people to maybe have irrational goals. So is it possible to have an irrational goal, but to pursue that goal in a rational manner?
Yes.
Yes, it is. And when we talked about ethics in here, and this is one of the things that a lot of philosophical ethicists criticize business for, is that they say that we're not really fulfilling needs and wants anymore. We are creating irrational wants and needs. And there's a condition that they've termed it called affluenza, which is that we're turning marketing on its head, where we're not fulfilling the needs and demands of consumers, we're actually creating them. We've reached a point in our society where we have so much. Does anybody really need this device? I mean, we still call this a phone, and yet I'm no longer controlling the camera with it because we're streaming live. But does anybody need this high power of a device? And it's not really a phone anymore, is it? How many of you actually talk on this device? You actually talk on it. Do you talk more or do you text more?
Oh, I text.
I mean, I don't.
Okay, so it's really a texting box. It's not really a talking box. It's really a texting box. Now, given the fact that this is no longer what we say it is, which is a phone, it's so many other things. How many of you use it as if you've had finance, how many of you downloaded the HP 12B2 on your phone for your finance class? So you've download.
Oh, I tried to
It's
do
an
that, it didn't
option.
really work that well.
So you got a financial computer?
Oh, my teacher
financial
told me,
calculator?
No.
I couldn't use my phone on.
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, I
you
use
can't use
So I had to go buy the
the testing
$38.
ones, the testing ones, financial calculator, I just use theirs. But for homework, I tried using my phone.
Because it's with you all the
It
time.
was okay. Like sometimes like there are certain, what's the end cost, I can't remember what it's called. When you're trying to do like the time value of money, you do it like year by year, it changes. It was really hard to do it on my phone for some reason, it would mess up, so I just used the computer.
Yeah, it'd be
So
nice
they
if
haven't
we just use
developed-
our phones, because then, I mean, you can fit everything. on
It
there.
could've
You can't
been-
fit everything else on the calculator.
It could have been user
My
error.
calculator.
Right, how many of you want to carry a financial, but you can get an app that will
Yeah.
do financial calculations. And when you're out in the real world, where they're not gonna say, this is an exam, you can't look up how to Google it. Like I suggested, maybe you should have done with the, how do you figure out what percentage the company was making in those three answers? Like you could Google that pretty quickly, how to get the whole, if you know the part percent of the problem. So does anybody need this device? No, you don't need this complicated of a device. They're coming out with new Apples. They've released them, have they? Did they release the new models?
They have instant breakouts.
Okay, but they've announced it, right?
Oh,
They
yeah.
announced it last week.
Yeah.
It was like last Wednesday. And they've got all kinds of new things that are probably not that different. People want to have the latest and greatest. One of my colleagues that I have drinks with on Tuesdays and Thursday afternoons, he runs out every time there's a new iPhone and buys the newest model. I just don't get it. But if you're gonna, that may be an irrational goal, but he pursues it absolutely rationally. How does he do that? Well, he knows where the store is. He plans out how to get it. He goes and buys it. He has the money. He knows when they're releasing it. So he kind of saves up because he's a poor guy. He's a political science guy. He's not one of the wealthy marketers.
It's kind of
So he
nice.
saves up, his little pennies or whatever in his kitty bank and decides that he's going to go get the new iPhone because that's what he likes more than jewelry, which is what I like. I collect a lot of watches and jewelry and things like that. Yeah. So you're going to say?
No, it's kind of nice, like now or whenever I got this phone, I guess they just recently started doing it to where you have the phone for like over a year, then you can just take it. It's like Apple lifetime or something like that. So you can just trade this phone in and then your payments, like, I guess, pick back up or something. Which is kind of nice. So it allows you to stay up on.
To stay up on the latest and greatest technology. Yeah, and they're coming out with all kinds of ways to incentivize you to basically turn in your phone, get a new one, get the latest. And they're cannibalizing their own products. And so we can pursue irrational goals like the want to get a new iPhone when this current iPhone will work just fine. But we can do it in a completely rational, comprehensive manner. So how do we do that? Well, we plan to achieve goals, and it begins with the problem recognition. And it starts with recognizing, as Maslow, all the textbooks talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where you are on this hierarchy. At the bottom are what we call basic needs or physiological needs. This is the need for shelter, food, water, and warmth. Now, Maslow intimates that you can't climb the ladder, and why is this helpful for consumer behaviorists to understand and people who want to engage in integrated marketing communication? Because understanding where people are in terms of their needs allows us to market goods and services to fulfill those needs. At the bottom, this idea of food, water, warmth, shelter is enormously important. You cannot go in and be very successful, for example, in a low-income neighborhood marketing Rolex, because people that are worried about where their next meal is going to come from are not really worried about luxury watch brands. That's sort of an extreme example. But even things that are marketed in lower income neighborhoods, is ADT, which is an alarm company, prevalent in those neighborhoods?
No.
They don't go in and market in many of those neighborhoods. Why?
They can't afford it.
They can't afford it. They're more focused on getting enough to eat, feeding their children, not being exhausted. And so they will forego safety needs, maybe, because they've still got these needs to be met. Now, once you get into the others, again, Maslow says that you can't go from one level to the next without having the needs at the lower level satisfied. But once you get beyond the bottom level, I'm not sure that's true. So the next level up above physiological needs is safety. So security. And if you think about this, again, from a logical perspective, you can understand how if you're starving to death, you may not be really worried about safety. You might engage in less than safe behavior, like what might you do if you're starving to death in Oklahoma? Well, you might steal. That could put you at a perilous position in Oklahoma because we love what here? We love guns. We love guns.
I think private
We have a
prisons still-
huge percentage of the population that have concealed carry permits. And I'll never forget, 2 years ago, there was a news on News 9 and KFOR and stuff like that. This guy who had shot his third robber at his pawn store. He lives in the pawn store in Oklahoma City. And I can't remember if it's like he lives above it or if he just sleeps in the back of the cot that he has. He has this little like apartment, I guess, in the pawn store, and people kept breaking in. And he had shot his third intruder into the pawn store. Now, if you're starving to death, you need, in the words of George W. Bush, to put food on your family. I know how difficult it is for you to put food on your family. You might break into the pawn store and take a risk.
I find it in a pawn store.
Yeah, you think, but they don't have televisions to know. He's shot the third intruder.
Already calmed them, already calmed them.
Now, above safety needs, you get
Start tallying up.
psychological needs. A need to belong, to have relationships. But could you still be worried about safety even if you have a need to belong? I think you can, and I'll show you an example of how I think Maslow may not have this right. With regard to those first two, I agree. You may engage in safety risk if you are starving to death. But once you get up above that, you might have these other needs while you're still not having the need met at the lower level. When George W. Bush ran against Ann Richards for governor, she at the time, this was before he was president, was the most popular governor in the nation. And why was she the most popular governor in the nation? She had an enormous approval rating among her own people in Texas, and she was a national figure. And one of the reasons is that she was one of the first to really give it to you straight. I remember several interviews that they did with Ann Richards on things like 60 Minutes, where they had to bleep out significant portions of the interview because they showed her, for example, on a beach with her granddaughter down in South Texas on Galveston, and the granddaughter says, "Granny, why do you have to leave? Why are you leaving?" And she says, "Well, I gotta go." And then it's bleep, bleep, some stupid legislation that the Republicans have passed. And she was this enormously straight-talking politician. How did she get beat by George W.? Well, she got beat by people who are voters, and people who are voters generally want to belong. That's the reason you go vote. If you don't want to belong and you don't have some need for sort of socialization, you're not going to go vote. But he had played on an anomaly in the crime statistic. And he claimed that Governor Richards was lying to the people of Texas because she had said that crime was decreasing in Texas. And it was. It was decreasing in Texas at the time, but they had recently started to disaggregate one type of crime statistic from the others. They'd always disaggregated crimes and the crime statistics based on sort of the types of crimes, crimes against property, crimes against people, crimes of violence, crimes committed with guns, things like that, as opposed to nonviolent crimes, which is, petty theft, burglary, or generally nonviolent crimes. They had never disaggregated, in terms of demographics, juvenile crime up until that point. And so it looked like juvenile crime was on the increase in Texas because they started to disaggregate the data. So while the overall crime rate was decreasing, there was this blip on the radar that was showing that juvenile crime was increasing, And Bush made a big deal out of it. He said, the governor has the audacity to say that crime is decreasing in Texas when crime is becoming more violent, more random, and being performed by younger people all the time. He had the people of the state of Texas, the voters, who obviously have some need for belonging, because voting is by nature, at least at this point, a social activity. If you're gonna vote, you have to do what? Maybe it won't in the future. It may not be a social activity in the future if we can all sort of vote on this device and participate. I mean, we've got American Idol that can, tally votes apparently better than the state of Florida with regard to
I was thinking Chad.
who's more popular. We could, and that would be there's a problem with maybe doing this, but why is voting a social activity at this point? He said he was starting to say something. Sorry, I thought I heard something. It's a social activity because you actually have to take time to go down there
You get the
and
sticker.
vote. And you get the sticker, and you get to see the poll workers. And it's amazing to me how many people have their, old home week. I used to be a poll worker. I used to be an election board judge. And they would have these little, whole conversations. But voting is a social behavior because you still have to actually physically go there. You have to take time out of your schedule to go vote. And so it's definitely a psychological need. Why is it that you vote? You don't get anything tangible in return. It's got to be a psychic good. That you feel good about yourself for voting. And yet he was able to manipulate the population in Texas to believing that there were literally hordes of feral children roaming the streets of Texas, ready to rape, pillage, and plunder at the drop of a hat. And so he had this real fear. You could ask, he was one of the most disciplined politicians I've ever seen. In terms of integrated marketing communication, he was brilliant because he stayed on message. You could have asked him at a rally what time of day it was, and out would come, we must cure juvenile crime in Texas. And it was incredible. So I think it gets a little fuzzy on these upper levels. Then comes esteem needs, the need for prestige, a feeling of accomplishment. One of the things that you'll probably be most proud of in rapid order. Some of you this semester, I think, Mr. DeGree, you told me you're graduating in December, is that right?
Mhm.
Maybe I can ruin that for you. But, it will be a proud day when you walk across the stage and get the diploma, right? Your parents will show up, you'll have this need for esteem. Now, how can that influence marketing? Well, as we think about what you need, what are we going to market to you in terms of your esteem needs?
Diploma frames.
Yeah, we can do things like diploma frames. They have all of these packages when you go over to the bookstore and get your cap and gown, which when I graduated from college, you actually rented them because they had the really nice, heavy caps and gowns. Now it's just sort of a souvenir type thing. It doesn't look like all that special, but it is, I guess. And they'll market to you all kinds of other stuff along with that, which are things like what? Well, your diploma frame so that you can put your nice piece of paper. If you don't have that piece of paper, does it not mean that you don't have a degree? What's more important is the stamp on the transcript that says the Bachelor's of Science or the BBA was awarded on this date, and that you completed the requirements, and you can give that to employers or whatever. What other kinds of things do they market to you for esteem needs? Well, class rings. How many of you did that in high school, get a class ring?
There's also letter jackets.
Letterman's jackets, things like that. Those are all esteem needs. At the very top, and Maslow says that, and maybe I agree with him on this, is self-actualization. Achieving one's goal, and he says that most people never get to this point where we sit around, sort of, you can think of self-actualization as those people who sit around in the lotus position thinking about great thoughts. The philosophers over in the College of Liberal Arts sitting around there thinking really lofty ideas about, what is the meaning of life. From time to time when I was married, my wife would regale me with, what is the meaning of all of this? And I would say things like, well, madam, with regard to the ultimate purpose of the universe, don't ask me. I simply work here. So maybe I'm not very self-actualized, but understanding these problem recognition and needs recognition is important in thinking about this model of the rational actor, where they're going to be pursuing their goals and how we can market to them. So problem recognition, it depends on a lot of your needs, your personality, consistent behaviors or responses. So what will happen is you will have an ideal self versus your actual self, and you'll try to fulfill these needs to become your ideal self. And it's a combination of the two that influence the product, services, and brands that you will purchase based on this perception between your actual self and your ideal self. So we start with problem recognition. You're hungry. What are you going to do to solve it? This class gets out in 15 minutes, and you're going to do what?
I'm gonna get some food.
You're going to get some food, because that's what?
Prime lunchtime.
That's lunchtime.
Yeah.
And you're going to think about things like, where can I eat that's quick, fast, and convenient? Where is that?
Chick-fil-A.
Chick-fil-A.
Oh.
I hate Chick-fil-A.
Oh.
I know you do.
We had a whole discussion in my first sales class in consumer behavior on how much I hate Chick-fil-A.
Why?
You get Starbucks too, don't you?
I despise Starbucks.
Oh,
It's because
it
it's
is.
it's
Is it
because
the
it's
food or
Easter
the
and ain't as
philosophy?
popular is bad.
So like,
Why
Disney.
Yeah,
yeah.
I love Disney.
Well, so like, is it a service thing, like their philosophy, like?
I just don't understand why everybody thinks that Chick-fil-A is wonderful.
It's not so much
It's
the
their
food,
pleasure.
it's the
It's
service
their
is also great. That makes the food even better.
It's the most
I-
efficient
They
drive-through.
have the most efficient drive-through I've ever seen in my life.
And literally, I almost hit one with my car one time because they were walking
You're
across
gonna
the
go to
thing.
hell for that.
Their
Yeah,
chicken
and no, like
sucks.
the other day ran across trying to get to the next person that fell next to me. I almost
Chicken
hit
sandwiches are
them.
pretty
And
good.
like, oh, it's my pleasure. I'm like, you almost died. And it's your
I'm gonna go to
pleasure.
heaven. Yeah, because they get to go to heaven.
Yes, exactly.
Starbucks again?
It's the tool of the devil. I mean, they Starbucks, and this actually came out. They initially brewed really bad coffee
They just
because
burn it.
they wanted to upsell the coffee. So rather than getting a $3 or $4 cup of coffee, they would deliberately, and this came out in some memos that were released, they deliberately brewed bad coffee that would encourage you to do what?
By the more.
Buy the latte. You
Yeah.
know, buy something that is more expensive because it's got all the
Cream.
foamed whipped cream and things like that. And so I thought that was manipulating consumers in a way that was not necessarily ethical. And so I don't like Starbucks. I think they're the tool of the devil.
Oh, I always
They're-
thought they just bought cheap coffee beans and therefore they had to burn the beans with flavoring and stuff to make them
No, I mean,
They do burn the roast. And so
Yeah.
now they don't anymore. They have started getting better coffee. And so you can get coffee that actually doesn't taste like it's been, put through kitty litter to get your coffee. But I still, back to that they're the tool of the devil and I can't stand them. So
I like their food versions, but in high school I had to do an experiment on them. Like, have you ever tried Folgers Black Silk? Like brewed on like extremely strong settings. So we did like a Starbucks, like one of their coffee beans. Like we brewed it the exact same way we did Folgers Black Silk, and nobody even knew the difference. Like, but therefore it's like $11, or it was like $11 for this giant thing, Black Folgers or it's Folgers Black Silk brand, and then I think it was $18 for the same size at Sam's for their coffee bean, and no one could even taste the difference. It was sober. Like, so
yeah, I mean, you can make good coffee. Yeah, you can get Folgers and get good coffee if you put it through a French press rather than putting it through something that's got a filter that takes out all of the oils from the beans. That's what happens with most coffee makers is you've got this, and so they've started trying to do variations on it rather than using a paper filter. A lot of them now have that really fine wire mesh that will allow the oil to go through.
yeah, get it.
But it's still, if you steep it in a French press, it's still better. And so I have this thing about Starbucks. But that's my deal. So my problem recognition is going to exclude those from my evoke set, right? The irrational model actor actually says that we don't behave in this way. We don't engage with a problem recognition, the search for things, and then making decisions and evaluations. We actually just respond to stimuli in irrational but very predictable ways. And a guy named Martin Lindstrom writes a book called Biology in which he details this. And he says we even say things that show that we don't behave in a rational actor model. So for example, when we ask people about anti-smoking ads, and let's see if we can watch one of those. I wish I could get the...
Is there a good example that's like Nike? Where people like burn their Nike shoes.
Yeah, why would you do that?
Yeah, I mean, they already earned your money. Like it's pointless for you to burn them. Like if you don't want it anymore, just donate it to like a homeless guy. Seriously.
Yeah.
Like
But I mean,
Let them make the
it's
first
like
opinion
like
after
all publicity is good publicity with that in that case because
yeah,
their sales
I mean,
grows 31%.
Nike stock is just
Yep.
shooting up, man. It's crazy.
It's like
They had a slight dip on that first day and then just skyrocketed after that.
because
Well,
the
they're
funny thing is that like
contracts,
you know people that have boycotted business or like
Yeah,
NFL
like
or
universities,
supporters or whatever. Like
Yeah,
remember
it's not
whenever
very
Chick-fil-A's like creator came out and said himself about the LGBTQ community.
Yeah, it was packed.
Yeah, it was still they still did really good because even like people I saw all the tweets when that happened and like people of the LGBTQ were like, I'm sorry, like I know like you said that horrible thing, but I have an addiction. Like
All
I
right,
can't
so
stop going to Chick-fil-A. Like, I want to be gay and not sports. They're like,
I hate these ads so much.
why is it
For a
not?
period of time after that, it was like, there were.
Does it? Weren't I remember in our
Oh, yeah.
advanced professionals or
Yeah,
it's like
you have like these
it's like and we watched one of these and it's like triggers you to want to say and want to smoke.
Yeah.
Like if
I
you're a
saw that.
smoker, it's not gonna make you not want to stop smoking.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
Yeah. So much.
There's like concerts.
Oh, man.
Like
I
it's
used to
the
laugh when
worst.
I was in that
It's
movie.
like it's the worst of the worst.
Yeah.
people.
Okay, so the technology in this room has completely and utterly failed. Oh, and I see we've even lost the, we've lost everything. Isn't that great? So the one that I was gonna show you was the tips from a former smoker. It's a Terry commercial. She's the one who says, this is how you have to get dressed in the morning. You know, you have to put in your teeth, you have to put on your wig because she's lost, you know, as a result of radiation and chemo all over her hair. She's got a drape, yeah,
she's got a clean hole.
Yeah, she's got to hold the tracheotomy hole closed so that she can talk. And when they show these ads to various people, they say that are smokers, they say, oh my God, that's horrible. It makes me want to quit smoking. And of course, they don't quit smoking. And we've done more than just show, let's see from the current slide. We've done more than just ask them now. One of the things that they do is they take these surveys and they ask them how they feel about these ads. And they say, I want to quit smoking. But when we put them in fMRI machines and then we watch, so we watch the ads, we have them talk about a survey and what their feelings are. They want to quit smoking. They say it would seem from an outward perspective that the ads are working. Like they say, I'm highly motivated, how motivated seeing this ad are you to quit smoking? Oh, I'm highly motivated. That makes me, want to just run right out and buy Chantix or Wellbutrin or any of the others that are supposed to help you quit smoking, get on the patch. But when we actually put them in fMRI machines, the part of the brain that starts firing when they see the ad is actually not the part of the brain that fires when you see fear. It's the part of the brain that fires when you're experiencing pleasure. And so what it's doing is it's causing these people to want to smoke. The anti-smoking ad. So they may have the opposite effect, according to Lindstrom, of what we actually intend. Because what's actually happening is that people are responding to it. Now, what we don't know, or what I don't think he talked about in biology, if I recall correctly, was, is it having an impact on people who haven't started smoking yet? Which may be the real purpose of the ad, as we think about whether or not it's being an effective marketing communication tool and affecting consumer behavior. Is it encouraging students like you? One of the things that we know is that smoking is decreasing among all groups except one. Which group is that?
The high schoolers.
It's your age group. And
Yeah,
younger.
Jules.
They're all,
Please smoke a flash drive.
they're smoking a record number. So is it working among that group? So we respond in very predictable ways according to Lindstrom, and marketers can take advantage of this. And we can manipulate responses. So I think, I tend to think of this in terms of a Hegelian dialectic. I do think that we respond in many instances to stimuli in very predictable ways, particularly with regard to things like, I'm hungry, what do I know that's fast, quick, cheap, easy to go get? Well, that's McDonald's, and you don't have to think about it. Why is it that McDonald's is so successful? Because they are cheap, they are fast, and they are consistent. And you know when you're going through, Roanoke, New York, or Rome, New York, or Roanoke, Virginia, or Oklahoma City, McDonald's is going to be the same anywhere. And so maybe that is an impulse buy. I'm hungry, you see the McDonald's sign, you pull off, and you satisfy your need for the world's most nearly perfect French fries, which I do think McDonald's has the best French fries.
If they're done right, like if you get them,
If they're hot.
Yeah,
if they're
yeah,
hot,
if
they're
they're hot,
definitely the best French fries. With regard to
Chick-fil-A waffle fries.
bigger,
If they were extra crispy, then.
with regard to, so we may be responding to predictable stimuli. With regard to that, we tend to be more rational if the purchase is larger with regard to consumer behavior. If we're buying a home or a car or a laptop, I think we do tend to be a more rational actor. Why is that? Well, those are all decisions that are going to be far more long-lasting, particularly at home.
Does that depend though, like, on like a level of income? Because it's not rational necessarily to buy a Ferrari.
No, it's not. But that's, again, you can pursue an irrational goal in a rational, comprehensive perspective. If I want to buy a Ferrari, for example, what am I going to do? Well, I could go take on more law clients rather than, taking on the few that I take on because they're friends or family or something like that. I could actually actively go out and do things like do trademarks. And I have companies that approach me, because that's what I used to do, is file trademarks for companies that will approach me and say, do you want to do a trademark? And if I'm interested in their product, I will sometimes do it. But I can do a whole lot more of that if I wanted to buy a Ferrari. But no, it's not necessarily a rational decision to want the Ferrari. That could be rational. But the way I go about getting it could be rational in that I'm going to take on more clients. I'm going to make more money. I'm going to take the steps that are necessary to go and get the Ferrari. Now, having said that, I think that the synthesis model where we think about if it's a device like your laptop, you're going to give more thought to it than you are to lunch today. And if it's a home, you're going to give more thought to it than you do to the laptop. Or if it's a car, you're going to give more thought to it than you do the laptop. And if it's a home, you're going to give more thought to it than the car. I say that, and yet you still see people acting, I think, in somewhat irrational manner. And I'll give you an example of that. We had a customer, my mother owned a real estate company for a number of years. And we went into her house, and she was one of the first, this was years ago in the 1970s, and early 80s, and she was one of the first real estate brokerage firms to do training with their agents and get them to actually stage their home. That's become a big thing now. All the realtors do it, but my mom was on sort of the cutting edge of that, where she would actually go in and say things like, if you're not using this, you need to take it to storage. You go into the closets and tell people things like, you got to take out, it's summertime. By the way, when's the best time to sell a house?
Summer.
In springtime and summer, because that's when what?
People
People have a
leaving
tendency
schools.
they're not in school. They don't want to pull their kids out of school mid-year and move. And so they have a tendency to move during the spring and summer. So they start looking in the spring and hopefully get settled by summer. So that's sort of a typical buying pattern for a home. And my mother would go in and she would be one of the ones that would say things like, it's April. Take out the winter sweater so that this looks bigger, this closet looks, or this, built-in looks bigger. You got to take most of the personalized stuff. If you've got all kinds of knickknacks and tchotchkes on the fireplace and all of your, grandkids' pictures of every stage of their life, take that down because people want to picture themselves in your home and not you in the home. And she would tell people things like, you got to change the carpet. And we had one customer, one client that we listed their house, and they just were not going to change the carpet. And she'd say, you're not, and they said, we'll give a carpeting allowance. Now, a rational buyer would look at that and say, what? we would have people that would come into the home, and if people are truly completely rational, we would have people that would come into the home, they would look at the carpet, they'd say, oh, the house down the street is new carpet. What would a rational buyer say?
I can get the carpet I want.
I can get the carpet I want.
Yeah.
Rather, and
Or what?
during the 1980s, the standard stock color, the gray has become the new beige. Every flip home I go into now, they got gray walls and gray carpet. But in the 1980s, everything was beige. It was an eggshell off-white color on the wall and beige carpet. Why is that? Well, it'll go with almost anything. It's a neutral color. You can put all kinds of stuff. But people would come in and they would look at the carpet in this house and they're like, the house down the street's got new carpet. Now, a totally rational buyer would say what? Well, I will, I'll forego being able to visualize the new carpet in exchange for having my own carpet installed. So there can be a combination, I think, even within the synthesis model of both rational and irrational behaviors. What's a rational behavior? One of the things that people do when they buy homes, what do they think about? School districts. That's a huge one. If you've got kids. So I think the synthesis model is a nice model. There are also the PowerPoints online, just for you all to know. It also talks about the vowels, because that's good. Redundancy is good, because obviously vowels influences consumer decision making in terms of what you want. If you are an achiever or a striver or a maker, that's going to influence the kinds of products and services that you're going to be most likely to buy. So on Tuesday, we will talk about we finish consumer behavior. We'll talk about the communication process. So it'll be chapters 5 and 6, and then we will have the first test on Thursday, and it won't include chapter 7. I'll move that into the second exam. And I'll send out an email detailing that on D2L for you. All right? Yeah, a Scantron Form 882E. If you don't have them, I sell them. The department charges 50 cents. So it goes into the building fund so that we can do college business. Not really.
Yeah, I remember last semester, I definitely bought a few.
Okay, so, well, yeah, it was,